Biology Lecture 4, The Nervous System. For the next lectures in the series, we're going to be talking about biological systems in the human body, starting first with this one. We have to start, when we're talking about the nervous system, with the neuron, which is the base unit of the system. Neurons are comprised of dendrites, a cell body, and an axon, and nodes of Ranviers are exposed areas of the axon without a myelin sheath. A ganglia is noted as a cluster of nerve cells. Remember that neurons fire on an all or nothing scale, so they either fire or they don't. There's no in between. Because of this, the strength of signals depends on the number of neurons that are firing. Here's a picture of what a neuron looks like. The dendrites are attached to the cell body up at the top, but there are also dendrites at the bottom at the synapse area. The synapse is located here. And if there's another neuron here, so if there's another neuron body here, then this area in between is going to be what we call a synapse. The axon is the in-between, going from the cell body to the synapse, with the myelinated sheaths helping to conduct the signal faster. Now that we've gone over some basic anatomy of a neuron, let's go into the transmission of an impulse. The resting membrane potential is negative 70 millivolts. Please remember this value because it's going to be used on your test when it comes time to look at figures. This resting membrane potential is maintained by the sodium-potassium pump. And this membrane potential is what's going to depolarize when a signal is fired. There are two different kinds of summations. Temporal is when there's multiple signals over time, whereas spatial is the addition of multiple signals that are near each other in space. All of which are going to enhance a signal. Summation. Action potentials are what happens when the threshold voltage is reached. Once this threshold voltage is reached, the neuron will fire, and there's no stopping it. After the action potential, the repolarization period occurs. This is when the neuron resets its resting membrane potential. This is called the refractory period. Below is a diagram of what a depolarization looks like. When the neuron depolarizes, sodium rushes into the cell, and it creates a cascade going down. So as it's going down the axon, it'll be traveling in this direction. As the signal goes down, the areas that have already been depolarized are going to repolarize. This is where the membrane and the sodium-potassium pump resets the potential for later. During this period, the neuron is going to be almost insensitive to signal. Therefore, it's going to have to take some time before it's able to receive another signal. At the nerve terminal, the action potential triggers a calcium channel. This calcium triggers neurotransmitter release into the synaptic cleft, which is the area in between neurons. When the neurotransmitters are released, it's going to trigger a response in adjacent cells. And once these neurotransmitters have done their job, they undergo a reuptake process that clears the cleft. There are drugs that act to prevent this reuptake. For example, there are dopamine reuptake inhibitors. These are designed to help combat depression by preventing the body from reuptaking dopamine. Now that we've talked about how impulses are fired, we're going to go into the organization of the human nervous system in particular. Starting first with divisions of neurons. There are three types of neurons. Afferent neurons, or sensory neurons, travel to the central nervous system. Efferent neurons, or motor neurons, travel away from the central nervous system, with interneurons connecting the two. Think about it as afferent, or sensory, receives a signal or a stimulus, and efferent neurons, motor neurons, send out to muscles or glands to respond to the sensory information. And interneurons are just the intermediates. To the bottom right is a picture of a standard reflex arc. The first division of two is the central nervous system. It's comprised of white and gray matter. White matter being myelinated and gray matter being unmyelinated. As you remember from earlier in the lecture, myelinated axons are going to trigger signals faster. So, of the two, white matter is going to travel faster. This central nervous system is comprised of the spinal cord and the brain, basically going from your head all the way down. To the bottom right is a picture of what is comprised in the central nervous system. The second division is the peripheral nervous system. This is divided into somatic and autonomic, so what you can control and what you can't. In the right, everything to the left is the peripheral nervous system. But a good way to remember this is that the peripheral nervous system is simply everything that's not in the central nervous system. So in your appendages and protruding out of the central nervous system. Of the divisions, the autonomic nervous system is divided into two branches, with parasympathetic and sympathetic. The parasympathetic is the rest and digest, whereas the sympathetic is the fight or flight. These systems are going to trigger and stimulate the body to do very different things. Rest and digest, as the name would suggest, is the parasympathetic. This mechanism is going to trigger your body to, well, relax, digest its food, slow itself down, and just calm itself. Whereas the sympathetic is the fight or flight. This is going to cause things like increased heart rates and prevention of things like digestion to reallocate resources elsewhere. If you've ever been into an athletic event or under extreme duress, you've probably experienced what a sympathetic response looks like. This is going to trigger a certain response, and the two are antagonists to each other. So when one fires, the other one is going to slow itself down. This is how our body deals with situations that we are put under. Finally, reflex arcs. Reflex arcs are simply arcs that use interneurons in the spinal cord to relay information to the stimuli source and to the brain simultaneously. Monosynaptic goes straight from the afferent neuron to the efferent neuron, whereas polysynaptic has interneurons in between. Alright, so we've covered everything about the nervous system, but obviously you can go into more detail going back to your biology textbooks. Please join us in the next lecture as we continue our journey into the systems in the human body.